Remember that? Homesteading. You drop a can of tomato juice, you don't own anything any more than you plant a flag on the moon. You own the whole moon. How much of the moon you own, that's a continuum problem. That's a gray area. We can work that out. But you don't own the whole thing, and you don't own just that little bit. You own some reasonable amount where you put your trucks and stuff on the moon. That's how much you own of the moon. Another reason, Katrina. See, I don't mind that much as an economist that 1,900 people died in my area. I mean, I don't like it as a human being, but as an economist, What really bugs me as an economist is that the people who were responsible for those deaths are still in business. FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers are still in business. Imagine the owners of the Mississippi River killed a lot of people. They wouldn't be in business. They'd get their rear ends sewed off and somebody else would take over the Mississippi River or the Fraser River or whatever. So there's nothing in principle sacrosanct about water, that land, yes, land can be private, but water has got to be socialist and communist? No. We got to go for the whole way and be consistent libertarians and full libertarians. And libertarianism is a beautiful philosophy. It applies not just to pizza and burgers, it applies to everything. So I conclude, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything.
Can you say something about the justice system? Because that's the last, I really struggle with
sure. Okay, let's talk about courts and private defense agencies. Private defense agencies would be attached to police. Okay, so here's the problem. Katrina and Tonya are having a fight. Okay, so we have Katrina and Tonya are having a fight. They're having a dispute. And Katrina comes to the Walter Defense Agency, and Tonya goes to the Paul Geddes Defense Agency. Now, they're disputing who owns the dog or whatever the dispute is. It doesn't really matter. So there are four possibilities. One possibility is that I could say Katrina is right and Tonya is wrong. And Paul could say Katrina is right and Tonya is wrong. And that would be the end of it. Because both defense agencies go along with Katrina. And each of them are obligated to obey their own client, right? Katrina is my client, Tonya is Paul's client. They have a contract with each other that Tonya will accept whatever Paul says, and Katrina will accept whatever I say. So one possibility is that both of us say that Katrina is right. The second possibility is that both of us say that Tonya is right and that Katrina is wrong. Again, no problem, because Paul's police and my police will now make sure that Tonya gives the property in question over to Katrina. Another possibility, which I'll ignore, is that each of us side with the other guy. Namely, I think that Tonya is right over Katrina, whereas Paul thinks that Katrina is right, not Tonya. Let's forget about that. Let's take the one that most people think of. And they say, Katrina, you pay me, I'm supporting you no matter what. So I now say that Katrina is right and Tonya is wrong. And Paul says, Tonya, you're my client. Tonya, right or wrong, Tonya is right. Now we have a little dispute. There are two kinds of defense agencies. One, and here David Friedman and Murray Rothbard are both very good on this. I disagree with David Friedman on a lot, but not on this. I think he's magnificent on this. He says there are two kinds of defense agencies. One, legitimate ones, and the other, illicit ones. What are the legitimate ones? The legitimate ones are ones that have anticipated this. Paul and I realized that we're both courts, and that one day we'll come up with different views. And we say, well, if that happens, what do we do? And we say, we'll go to John. John is a good chess player, and he must be just. And we'll go to him. And we're obligated to do that. And everyone knows that. And legitimacy is a key here. You know, they say that the pen is mightier than the sword. You might think, how could the pen be mightier than the sword? The pen is this big, the sword is this big. The reason is because the pen determines the direction that the sword is pointed in. Legitimacy is very important, as shown by Mubarak. You know, he didn't have legitimacy. His soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. The crowds consisted of their cousins and their mothers and their uncles. So he lost out. Even though he had a lot of guns, the guns were pointed in the wrong way for him. So Paul and I have an agreement that if we come to a dispute, we go to John. And John decides. That's a legitimate court. The next time, John and Paul might have a dispute and they come to me. Right? So there's no one Supreme Court. It's just a market-based court system. Now, that's the legitimate courts. The illegitimate courts, illicit courts or bandit courts are the ones that say, I don't care. Either I don't anticipate this, or if I do, I say, the hell with every other court, my way or the highway. Well, notice that the illegitimate court is going to have to fight everybody. Right? He's going to have to fight other illegitimate courts and legitimate courts. Whereas the legitimate court will only have to fight illegitimate courts. Do you see that? And fighting is more expensive than negotiating. And the presumption is there'll be a weeding out of illegitimate courts. Nobody is going to listen to a legitimate court. One of my favorite movies is the Godfather movie. And in the Godfather movie, the baker's daughter was raped. And the baker came to the Godfather and said, kill him. Remember what the Godfather said? You're not into Godfather movies? You people are pathetic. The Godfather movies are the essence of libertarianism. What the Godfather said was, he only raped her, he didn't kill her. We will beat him within an inch of his life, but we won't kill him. Namely, he was striving for some sort of legitimacy and justice. Right? I mean, libertarian justice, which is a whole other area, the punishment is proportional to the crime. And if you rape someone, you don't have the death penalty for that. Egregious as is rape, but you really beat the crap out of the guy. And maybe part of it is with a splintered broomstick. If you get my guess here. So you need poetic justice, but you don't kill him. So even the Godfather felt that he had to have some sort of legitimacy. So that's the 5-minute answer to the question of private courts, private defense agencies. There would be private defense agencies. These would be better. Look, let me apply it to something else. Let's talk about pure food and drug. There was this drug called thalidomide. Thalidomide was a great morning sickness drug. Women in the first trimester of their pregnancy were coughing up their guts. They take this, they're fine. 2 or 3% of the cases, you had birth defects. Bad ones. Very, very, very bad birth defects. Who approved of this? The FDA in the U.S. and the West German one was sort of complicated. The West German, this is before the reunification of Germany. The German FDA approved of this. The American FDA didn't disapprove of it. It was used here as well. You had birth defects. What happened to the FDA? They are still in business. If a private certification agency made a mistake, they'd be out of business and make room for other better ones. So this was a type 1 error. Type 1 error is when you approve of bad stuff. Type 2 error is when you refuse to approve of good stuff. So now the FDA does type 2 errors. Before you can get a new drug in, it takes 10 years and $10 zillion. So you've got a lot of people going from the U.S. to Canada or Mexico or whatever. They have this rule that not only has it not be harmful, but it has to do some good. So there are people in the last stages of cancer who are given 1 month to live and want to try an experimental drug and the FDA won't allow them. Isn't that disgusting? Isn't that despicable? That's government for you. Tell that to the health people when you get in trouble with them about what government does in health field. So the idea is if you have competition in certification agencies, you have the Harvard Medical School certifying stuff, or the Acme company, or my company. I know nothing about biology or chemistry, and anyone listens to me is an idiot, and nobody's going to pay me. And no one's going to pay the FDA, and no one's going to pay FEMA or the Army Corps of Engineers. So this idea that Hazlitt tells us in his economics in one lesson about why free enterprise is more efficient than others because of the weeding out process of profit and loss, it applies to everything. It applies to defense, it applies to soldiers, it applies to courts, it applies to police, it applies to everything.
An argument is that the private justice or police agency will lead to an aggregation and a monopoly of force by a gang of bandits. How would you counter that?
Well, there's a guy, Robert Murphy, who wrote a thing called Will the Warlords Take Over? And I recommend that to you. Just Google that. And he says, look, there's a chance that they would, but they already have. At least we start off here where they're not. And there are incentives. If you start from a market operation, the incentives are not toward monopoly or toward, misusing the word monopoly, toward aggregation. Paul and I, yes, we might have an incentive to merge, but then other companies would come up, and it's a market. But the bottom line is we already have the warlords taking over. I mean, what do you call Obama? I call him Obama, O-B-O-M-B-A. I mean, he's bombing the crap out of innocent people all over the place on his own say-so. He's a warlord. Yes, he's treating the people in America okay, if you forget about TSA and taxes. And but look at him internationally, he's a warlord. He's the most powerful warlord. Somebody mentioned Alexander the Great. Obama is much more powerful than Alexander the Great. What's his name? The conservative MP, Prime Minister?
Paul Harper.
Paul Harper is bombing people in Afghanistan. Stephen Harper. I don't think Canada's in
civilian Afghanistan.
Sorry, I don't mean that. I don't mean to deprecate the imperialism of Canada. But what did the Libyans do to us in Canada?
They pissed us off somehow.
Well, that's warlordism. They piss you off and you drop bombs on them.
They said that's Hillary's war.
Well, Hillary, but Stephen Harper was once a libertarian when he worked for the classical liberal. Well, anyone can call himself free enterprise, but he doesn't legalize drugs. He bombs people in Afghanistan and now Libya. He's a warlord of a lesser sort than Obama, but he's a warlord, and I think that. Oh, look, we now have in the U.S. more private police than public police. Why don't the police from Six Flags and the police from Walmart and the police from, Disney World, why don't they all get together and take over? Is there any danger of that happening? It doesn't seem reasonable that that's in the cards. So read Murphy's piece on why will the warlords take over. It's a very powerful argument. And I've got, if you email me, I'm at wblog@loino.edu. Email me and say warlords, and I'll send you a lot more than just that. There's whole literatures on this. And there's a whole literature on privatizing water. So on any of these things, or that book that I say is for free, email me and I'll send you that as well. Yeah.